Hello, and welcome to Learn to Code with Python tutorials on MarsCode. This is lesson 1, and this is based on the topic of programming and mathematics. My name is Alicia Habibi, and I'll be the instructor for these tutorials. So let's get started. The lesson will cover the following topics: Python syntax and import libraries. We'll be looking at data types, the print method, the input statements, the import time, and import math modules or libraries. We'll also be looking at functions and data structures, which involves lists, functions with and without parameters. We'll be looking at logical operators and if-else statements. These logical operators involve and, or, not, and if-else statements. We'll be looking at the for and the while loop structures, which involves the for loop structure and the while loop structure. We'll also be looking at string methods and casting. And the string methods we're going to be looking at is the isDigit, the isAlnum, the isAlpha, the int, and the data type casting. We'll be looking into math arithmetic operators, which involves add, subtract, divide, multiply, and find exponent value. We'll be looking at math functions such as math.sin, math.cos, math.tan, math.radians, and round. Finally, we'll be looking at ANSI escape color codes and ASCII art, which basically just make the console user-friendly. Mathematics is, in its own way, the poetry of logical ideas. We'll start with the first topic, basic Python syntax and import libraries. What are they and how are they used in Python programming language? The first one we're going to be looking at is the print function or print method, and this is basically used to print statements on the user screen. We're also going to be looking at the 3 or the 4 different type of data types. The first one is str, which is string. It's basically used to store text-like data or alphanumeric data like password. We also have int, which is used to store whole numbers like age. Float, which is used to store real numbers or decimal numbers like weight or height. And then we have bool, which is also called boolean in some programming languages. And it basically is used to store 2 value types of data, like true or false, yes or no, on or off. The third thing we're looking at is the input function, and that is very important because that's what you use to be able to ask for user input. We also have this import time module, which basically creates time pauses between statements and seconds. So for example, if you want to print a statement and then you want to wait till after 1 second or 2 seconds to print another statement, you're going to be using this import time module. You have to import it before you actually insert that time dot sleep, which you're going to see in some of the examples we'll do. We also have import math, and that one's very important if you want to put math functions in your program. That's like math.sin. You want to find the sine of an angle, or you want to be able to find the logarithm of something. Those are just examples of some of the math functions that you can get from this math library. Now let's have a look at an example of a Python program and see how we can implement all these basic syntax in Python in a program and what the output is going to be like. As you can see here in the first line, we have import time and import math in the second line. So we've basically imported 2 libraries. One is the time library and the other one's the math library. We're printing a statement saying, welcome to the Get to Know Me chat room. Then we're creating a variable on line 5, which is called name. And you notice that we're using the str, which is the data type for string or for data input. And then we're using that input keyword to request input from the user by asking them what their name is. So the question in quotation mark is, what is your name? Then we have another print statement, which basically responds back to the user once they enter their name. And it's going to say, nice to meet you. And you notice that there's a quotation mark that ends, and then after there's a comma with the name variable. That's because variables, we never put them in quotation marks when you're coding. They have to be outside of quotation marks because they're just storage locations in the computer's RAM. So after asking for the name, we're asking users for their age, but you notice now we're creating a variable on line 7 called age, and we're using a data type of int. That's because age is whole number, and int is the data type used to store whole numbers. Then we're using that input keyword, and we're asking them, how old are you? Now on line 8, we're printing just a statement to make the program feel a bit more realistic. We're saying print interesting. And then on line 9, we're asking another question, but this time we're using a different type of data type, which is float, because we're basically putting real numbers in our question. So we're saying, what is 12.3 plus 24.2? And then in line 10, we're printing that same statement, but there's a difference here. Here, we're printing the statement to kind of confirm with the computer, is 12.3 plus 24.2 equal to 36.5? So the computer would return that Boolean result, whether this is true or false. Now, finally, on line 11, we're printing again this pi value just to show you how we can use this math module that we imported, or math library. So we're basically using that same word math.pi so we can get the pi value. But there are many different type of math functions that you can use. This is just one example. Now, once this code is ran or is successfully checked, you can see that it's giving this output here on my right side. And the output is welcome to get to know me chat room. And you can see it saying, what is your name? And I put in my name is Alicia. It's saying, nice to meet you, Alicia, because remember that Alicia is the variable. And then it's saying, how old are you? And I'm saying 13, and it says interesting. And then you can see that it's asking that question that I put on line 9, what is 12.3 plus 24.2? And I put the answer is 36.5, but then the computer is responding back to me with true because 12.3 plus 24.2 is 36.5. But you see that the true is the Boolean result because it takes two states. And then finally, when I print the pi value, you can see it's returning to me the full pi value using that math.pi, so using that math module. Now let's look at functions without parameters. What is a function? A function is just a block of code that runs when it's called. And there are two types of functions in Python. We have functions with parameters and functions without parameters. Whenever you want to create a function, you have to use that keyword called def or define. So for example, the first one here, we can see the code on the left. It says function without parameter, and we have a sample code there. On line 1, we've used the keyword def to create this function, and we're giving our function the name of intro. Inside of the function body, we have this variable called name, and again, we're assigning the data type as string, str, and the input statement, and we're asking the user to enter their name. Then we're printing another message that's going to respond to the user saying, hello, whatever name they enter. Now you notice on line 4, we're calling this function. If you don't call your function, it's not going to run. And how you call the function is by putting the name of the function, but making sure you're on the same indentation, which means the same line as where you define the function. So I've called the function by putting intro, and then I put those parentheses. That's how you call your function. Just put the name and then parentheses. Now, if you run this program, all you're going to get is this question that says, please, or rather the statement that says, please enter your name. And once I type my name, Alicia, it responds back to, hello, Alicia. So if you type any name there, it's just going to respond back to hello, whatever name you typed in. But this is an example of a function without a parameter. Now, what are functions with parameters? Slightly different. It's just the same structure. You notice that the function with parameters is basically defining, again, we have this defined keyword def, and we're putting the name of the function. And the function name is intro, and we're passing two parameters inside. We're passing name and we're passing subject. Now, inside the function, you notice that this time we're not asking them for the name like we did with the function without parameters, sorry. Here, we're just printing a statement that's going to say hello, their name, and it's going to say I like subject to. So the subject will be whatever subject they enter. So whenever you say function with parameters, it's just what you put inside of your brackets of your function that you want to get as an input from the user. Now you notice on line 3, I'm creating another variable called name, or the same, I wouldn't say another, because it still has the same name. You can create the same name, you can create another name. It doesn't matter. So I'm creating a variable called name, and again, it has a string data type with an input keyword, and it's saying, what is your name? On line 4, I'm creating a variable called subject, again with a string data type, an input keyword, and it's saying, what is your favorite subject? Now on line 5, I'm calling this function just like I did when I was calling the function without parameters. The only difference is because this function has parameters, you have to put those two parameters or attributes that you've called or you've created on line 1 when you're creating the function. You have to put them now on line 5 when you're calling the function, because if you don't, you're going to get an error. So you have to put them so you can indicate to the compiler, which is the software responsible for running your program, that you need to get those two inputs from the user so you can be able to print or do something inside of your function, which in our case, it's going to print that message saying, hello, whatever name they enter, and then I like whatever subject they enter too. So now if you run this code, you can see the output on my right side here, which says, what is your name? And then once I put NASHA, it says, what's your favorite subject? And I said coding. You can see that the message returned to me is the same message inside of the function, which says hello name, which is the name I put NASHA. And then it says, I like subjects, and it's the subject I put coding. So now you can see the difference. Functions with parameters and functions without parameters. One of them has attributes inside of its parentheses, which means things that you want to get input from the user, and the other one does not. So it all depends on your program and how you want to use and create functions. Now we're on to lists. So lists are basically used to store multiple items in a single variable. If you want to store multiple things, then a good way to do that is by storing them in a list. One thing to remember is that list items are ordered and they're changeable and they're indexed. So anything inside of your list has an index position. So just like a position, just like you're sitting in a classroom and you're sitting on a chair, you have your own position. Everyone has their position. So it's the same thing with lists. Anything inside of the list has its own position. The first item in the list always has an index value of 0. And the second item follows after that, which has an index of 1. The index of -1 is usually for the last item in the list, and then -2 is for the second last, and so on. So whenever you're going from back front, you start getting those negative index values. But when you're going from like left to right, so front back, then you get these positives, starting at 0 in the first place. So for example, we have a little program syntax just to understand how indexes are created, how lists are created. So here we can see this list called groceries. So if you want to create a list, first you have to put the name of the list. Then you put an equal sign, and then you put square brackets. These square brackets can be empty or they can be filled up. If they're empty, it's like you're creating an empty list. If they're filled up, it means you're creating a list that contains things. For example, here in groceries, we can see that this list has 3 items. It has apples, onions, and potatoes. Now, each of these items have their unique positions. The first item in that list is apples, so it always starts with an index position of 0. We normally count from 1, but the computer always counts from 0. So if you were to get apples or you wanted to print out apples, you'd have to print it using its index position of 0. And then after it follows onions, which has an index position of 1, and then potatoes, which has an index position of 2. And if I add some more things in there, they're just going to continue in that sequential order, which is 3, 4, and so on. So you notice now I'm printing the name of my list inside of my parentheses, and I'm putting an index position in the square brackets. So I'm printing groceries 1. What is that going to return for me? It's going to return for me onions, because onions is the one at the first index position. Remember that apples starts at 0, and then onions is 1, and potatoes is 2. So that's just how list works. It's really important for you to understand how index positions are used with lists, because when you're coding, especially using lists, you're going to be using that at some point. Now, what are the list methods? What are some methods that we need to know for lists? Because we're going to be creating programs for different programming scenarios, so we need to understand the methods of lists very well so we can understand the concept when we're actually coding. The first method of list is called len. This method is used to find the number of items in a list. So for example, if you remembered our previous list example we just did now, where we had like 3 grocery items, if you actually did len of groceries, which was the name of the list, it will return for you 3 because those are the number of items inside of the list. So that's what the len method does. The second method is append, and what that does is that you can add items to the list. So if I wanted to add more grocery items to the groceries list, all I have to do is just say groceries.append, and inside of the parentheses, in quotation marks or in closing quotation marks, I just have to put what I want to add to that list. Now, number 3 you can see is remove, and that one is just used to remove a specific item from the list. So for example, again, if I wanted to remove onions from that grocery list, I would just write the name of the list, which is groceries, .remove, and then inside of the parentheses, I'll put quotation marks and just put onions enclosed in those quotation marks, and it's just going to take it out. And so if I print the list, I will only have apples and potatoes. I wouldn't have onions. The fourth method is for sorting the list. If you want to sort the list alphanumerically in an ascending order, you would just say sort. Like if your list is not alphabetically sorted, it will just sort it out for you. But if it is already sorted, it wouldn't do anything. So these are like 4 different types of methods of things that we can use with lists when you're coding in Python. There are many other methods, but these are the 4 ones that we might be seeing when we're coding a scenario in this tutorial. Now, there's also some other parts that I included here. I just added, which you notice there's clear as well. So there's an additional clear, which basically is used to remove items from the list. I'm not going to read through 1 to 4 because we just saw that, but I'm going to look at 5, 6, and 7 because that involves new methods. So clear just means that you're removing items from the list. For example, if I said groceries.clear, what happens is that all those items inside of the groceries list are just going to delete. If I print the list is just going to print empty. And then we have the 6th one, index, which is really important. And this index method is basically used to find the index position of an element in your list. For example, if I said groceries.index and inside of the parentheses I put in quotation mark onions, then it's just going to return for me the index position of onions, which is at 1. So that's what the index does. The 7th one is reverse, and this method basically from its name, it just reverses the order of the list. So if it's going in sort of alphabetical order, it's just going to reverse it. So it just does the opposite of how you've organized your list. Now here's an example of a code of how we implement some of those methods we've just seen of a list and how we create a list in a Python program. You notice here in the first line, we're importing time again. So remember what time does. It's a module that is used to create time pauses between statements and usually in seconds. So we've imported time. Now we're printing this welcome message on line 2 saying, welcome to the grocery list filler. Then on line 3, we're basically saying, please note you can only store 4 items in this grocery list. So we're basically creating like a grocery list that's initially empty, but then users can add things to it. So on line 4, you can see that we're creating this grocery list and we are putting groceries equals to square brackets, which has nothing inside. So we're creating like an empty list. Again, it doesn't matter if I didn't start groceries with a capital G. You can write it however you want. Just make sure that when you're writing variable names or method names, you should never give spacing. Even if it's a 2-worded variable or method, you should have some sort of symbol that connects the words together. So there's never spacing with variable names, which you're going to see on line 5. You notice I have a 2-worded variable there, which is first item, but there's an underscore that basically connects the 2 words together. So I can't do first space item. I would be getting a syntax error there. So you have to be careful for these type of things. Now on line 5, we're creating a variable called first item. And then again, we're using this str, which again is a string data type, and we're having input, and we're asking them to enter their first item that they would like to add to this groceries list. So then on line 6, you can see that we're using that method called append, and we're saying groceries.append first item. In parentheses, we're putting the name of the variable that's going to be storing the first item that they enter that they want to add to this groceries list. Now on line 7, we're having again another variable called second item. Again, the same kind of format. We're asking them to enter the second item. And then on line 8, we're adding that second item to the groceries list. Same thing happens on line 9. We're creating a third item variable. We're asking them to enter a third item, and we're adding that to the groceries list. And then finally on line 11, we're creating a fourth item variable and again asking them to enter the fourth item for this grocery list. And then on line 12, we're adding that to the groceries list again. Finally, we're printing just random asterisks. This is what we call ASCII art, which we're going to learn a little bit more later in this tutorial. So you can put any symbol you want there. I just put random asterisk symbols. I don't really count how many there are. It just creates some sort of nice decor on the console of the user. So there's still more going on. You look at line 15 now. We finished asking the users to enter all of the grocery items, and we've added those grocery items to the list called groceries. Now on line 15, we're trying to practice the use of more of those methods that we've just seen. So here we can see on line 15, it says you have len grocery items in your grocery list. Remember what the len method does is to find the number of items you have inside of a list. So in this case, it's supposed to be returning 4 because we just allowed users to add 4 items. After that, I'm just printing another set of random asterisks just to create some nice decor on the console. So again, that is just a very basic use of ASCII art. Now on line 17, I'm using this /n, and what it does is just, I usually call it /, it might be a backward slash, but what it does is just it creates that next line break. So it gives you like a break or a space, and then, prints the next thing after it. So that's what it does. It's like a next line break or a next break line, however you want to see that. Basically just creates an empty space for you on the next line and then prints something after that empty space. So on line 18, you can see that I'm printing the first item in the grocery list. And what am I doing? I'm putting the name of the list, groceries, and in square brackets, I'm putting that index position of 0, like I told you, because that's how you print the first item in a list. Then afterwards, I'm having another asterisk, I'm having another /n, because now I'm going to print the last item in the grocery list. So you notice that I'm doing, again, the name of the list, groceries, but in the square brackets, I'm now saying -1 because I'm going from the back, right? So starting printing from that back. So that's why it's -1. It's not going positive because I'm not going like from the beginning towards the end. I'm going from the end towards the beginning, sort of like that. Now afterwards on line 24, I'm using a different method and I'm saying groceries.sort. So after basically printing the first and last item, I'm now sorting that list. And remember how it sorts. It just basically sorts in an ascending order. And then on line 25, I'm basically printing out the list because I'm saying the grocery list sorted in alphabetical order and I'm calling that list grocery. So I'm printing it out. Now on line 28, again, I'm reversing the list. So I'm reversing the order of the list. If it's been sorted, now I've reversed it again. And you can see I'm saying groceries.reverse. On line 29, I'm now printing the list again after it's been reversed. So you notice that I'm doing things and I'm printing the list so you can see that change or that difference between one step to another step. So initially when I sorted the list and now when I'm reversing the list. And then afterwards, you can see that I'm now clearing the list. But you notice I said on line 32, your grocery list will be cleared in 2 seconds. And then I'm using that time.sleep too, which as I told you, I can use because I've imported that time module, that time library in the first place. So when I say time.sleep, this is how you use that time library, is when you import it, then you can say time.sleep. And inside of the parentheses, you can specify how many seconds you want to wait before you do the next thing. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying after 2 seconds, I want to clear the groceries list. So I've done it on line 34. I've said groceries.clear, which means that the list is just going to get deleted. Not deleted, but the items in the list would disappear, would clear. And then finally, on line 37, I'm saying that your grocery list has been cleared and I'm printing out the groceries. So you can see that it's just going to print empty because I've cleared everything. So now let's see the run of this program. Here's the run of the program. Here's the output. You can see what happens in the beginning is that it starts to ask the user to enter all those 4 items. And those 4 items have been entered: bread, honey, eggs, and pasta. Then using that len method, it's basically printing out how many items are present in the list. And you can see it saying you have 4 items in your grocery list. That's because we use the len method to figure out how long the list was. Then you can see that it's printing out the statement. The first item in your grocery list is bread, because remember that was how we printed it out by using the index position of 0. Then it says the last item in your grocery list is pasta, because we did that -1. Obviously, because pasta is the last thing that I entered, which is on the 4th item. So that's why it's the last thing. It's -1. Then you can see that the grocery list has been sorted in alphabetical order, and it's starting with B, then E, then H, then P. And then afterwards, you can see that the grocery list has been sorted in a reverse order. So it's now starting from P instead of from B, and then it's going P, H, E, B. So it's doing the reverse. And then finally, you can see that the grocery list says it will be cleared in 2 seconds, and it waits for that 2 seconds, clears the list, and then you can see that now when it says your grocery list has been cleared and prints it out, you can see that the list is empty at the bottom.